All right, we've got
Right.
Mr. Rex Pennycuff, the unofficial mayor of
I
Eastpoint.
don't know if
Uh,
I'd go that far, but
we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Also, an entrepreneur here in Eastpoint. You've got the Scoop, which is our family's favorite ice cream place. Talk about that, and one of the staples here in Eastpoint, Fisherman's Choice.
one of the long
Um,
time stays.
yes, sir. 30 years plus, right?
Yep.
30 years plus. I can't wait to dive into the history on that. Learn more about you. Learn more about growing up in Eastpoint. You're so involved in Eastpoint. I really want to talk about that kind of stuff. But before we get going, this is for you. I thought this was appropriate, seeing as you are Eastpoint native. That's our dark roast, and it's got a little extra caffeine in it. There's a funny story behind that one. I started roasting coffee on my porch in Georgia. We had a newborn at the time, and he just was not sleeping at all. So we were super tired. I discovered this bean called Robusta. It's got a little extra caffeine in it. Started blending it in just to get a little extra jolt before work. And all that while, we discovered this oyster house right here, which I'm sure you can share some
Yep.
stories about this place too. And that's when the dream was founded. We were like, we want to move down there. We want to turn that oyster house into a coffee shop. And so the first blend I came out with called the Eastpoint Special. So that's the first one, and I hope
Cool.
you enjoy it.
Sounds great.
So let's get to know you a little bit better, man. So your dad, Mr. Charles, is from Tennessee.
Yep.
Moved down to the Eastpoint area like 1970s.
Would have been in the 70s. I'm not exactly sure the date. He would have been um, around 17, 18 years old. Come down here from Tennessee, small area up there, Jamestown, Birdstown area. Grew up. Sort of really interesting story to me. My mother and my father both were born in the same area, but my mother's family, the Hatfield family, moved down here when she was 2 years old, and started out in Carabel, in poor side of town. She's got stories of living in cardboard houses, stuff like that. And then they sort of migrated to East Point, which is sort of also interesting. East Point basically comes because, and I know a lot of the old guys, one of my best thing about it is that basically people moved to East Point because it was closer to work. And that's sort of what brought my father down here. He's a young boy. There wasn't nothing there in Jamestown except shirt factory. Other than that, it was farming. He grew up toting 80-pound bags of tobacco across fields at 8, 9 years old. He had a stepfather, then didn't have a stepfather, so he became a man of the house, sort of done a lot of the stuff that we really just can't imagine a kid doing in today's day and time. But when he got that age, with nothing to do, his mother, Pauline, knew my mama's mother, Ellie, and she said, Lord Pauline, come on down to Florida. You can put all them kids to work. Coming from family of 8 and family of 9, that was a commodity to have something that you could do.
Yeah.
My dad sort of come down here and then he bounced back to Tennessee, or well, his mom actually bounced back. He sort of come, a man at that time, basically late teens, 20-year-old, went to work with a couple of the Millanders, Burt Millander and all, and basically hired on at a man's wage because he could do a man's work.
For sure.
So that time they'd go out on the bay, and it was basically daylight to dark. If they wasn't oystering, they'd come in, change, put a mullet net on, go back out mullet fishing, and sort of just fit in and really started providing. He wound up. His mother moved back, and then she come back, and slowly, basically picked every one of his brothers and sisters from Tennessee that's wound up now living in this area. Um, Now, pretty much all of them live somewhere between Crawfordville and White City. So that's the story of my father and how he originally come. Like I said earlier, my mother come when she was 2. Grew up. My uncles grew up on the party boats in Carabel, going out. Basically, same thing. I come from pride myself in coming from a family of workers.
Yes, sir.
My mama's worked hard. Her family's worked hard. My daddy's worked hard. There's been times we didn't have much, but we had a lot of work ethic, and that's sort of what it is. And I ain't gonna tell you that we got a whole lot today. I tell you that it's a lot easier than it has been at times. But even after 33 years, it's still times that it's tough, and
Yes,
you
sir.
wonder what's going on. Um, but, like I say, she and her teens moved over to Eastpoint from Carabel and settled, and then they sort of got together, and actually they lived with my mother's family for a few days, I think, over on Hatfield Street, but wound up actually right here at the trailer park behind the coffee spot was the first place they was, and that's where I started. Come to be, it was in that trailer park and living there, and um, great stories. Some of I remember, some of I recall, some of them are fresh, but stuff having a squirrel that chased my uncle. Some reason he liked everybody but my uncle. But my uncle would come in, he'd fly across the room and doing kid things, chasing me up the hall. I'd turn around, chase him down the hall.
The squirrels coming in the house.
The squirrel lived with me. He was my pet, I mean,
That's
I
awesome.
mean, just stuff like that. That's just sort of what life's all about.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so that is fate, man.
yep.
They come from similar areas in Tennessee to come down here and connect and build this great family and businesses, and that's a really cool story.
Yep, pretty neat. And they worked to give you a little bit more feel of if you they got together, worked hard, oystered together. My mom shucked. She was one of a few ladies that was I called really good oyster shucker. I mean,
It's
they
not
could.
easy.
It's not easy. It's a lot of hard work, but she could pump out 20 plus gallon days of shucking oysters, and there's not a lot of women that can do that.
Yeah.
But there's a long line of them that come through, and she was one of. I'm not going to tell you she's the best. She's the best in my eyes,
Yes, sir.
but she was one of the best in the area. My dad a lot of times would go out and get them and bring them into her. We'd load them up in a stall somewhere, and she'd chuck them out, especially in the winter months. And they had a hard time starting out. Some of the old history of Franklin County, the oyster bars was closed in the summer. So in summertime, um, they picked deer tongue in the woods. They done whatever it took to live.
Yeah.
They mullet fish, they crab, they shrimp. My dad wound up shrimping, owning a small shrimp boat. He done that the majority of the time. He'd oyster half the year and shrimp half the year, depending on the season and the call. But was pretty successful in both, and done real good. And like I say, my mom was right there beside him, working hard every day, and that sort of instilled a good work ethic in me. I remember working hard. I'd go to school, work on the weekend. I'd go to school in the '80s, late '80s, and I'd be made $100 on the weekend, which was a lot of money
A
for
lot
a
of money
13,
back then. It's a
14
lot of
year
money
old.
now, really.
But it was a lot of that come from I seen my mom and dad struggle and work
Mhm.
hard, and there was things I wanted, and I wasn't going to ask them to provide that for me. They'd have provided anything I wanted or done the best they could, but there was just certain things I wasn't going to ask them to do that I knew I could do.
Right.
And it also allowed me some time to play sports and do some different things that really didn't put an impact on them financially. I mean,
Yeah.
them times was struggle enough as they were.
Absolutely. Speaking of shucking, one of the coolest things about this coffee house, I've got a shucking stall right there. And I've got a shucking machine that Brandon gave me from Lens, and I've got some cool other things over there, like a culling iron and a block and a hammer. I love telling people about it. I don't know that much about it, just from talking to folks like you and other folks who come in here. And we've had people stop at that stall, and you can see it in their eyes. They're reminiscing because
Yeah.
they worked there or their grandmother worked there. And it's just so neat to keep that history alive. And so many people are just now discovering this area. They're coming down from wherever, and they don't realize that rich history of the bay and the oyster industry and all that stuff. So it's really cool to take them on a miniature history lesson of what that stall was, what it meant to everybody here, because that's what most people did. It was a generational trade, a generational skill, and it's really cool to keep that all alive.
Yeah, and that's to me that's sort of the greatest thing about living here is that heritage, that community that I grew up in. It was just hard, honest work.
Yes, sir.
And like I say, ladies would show up and they'd shuck. I grew up in an oyster stall. or he actually probably a bin, a shucking bin behind. They used to would bring the oysters in. You'd load them on a wheelbarrow, roll them up, put them in a bin behind, and then as the women would need, or men, there were several men that done it. But as they would need oysters, you'd shovel them in a stall, and then they'd shuck them out. I would get in one of them empty stalls, and that's where I hung out, and
Yeah.
that's where I'd spend my days when I wasn't at school, if I wasn't on a shrimp boat. It's fascinating stories to me
Yeah.
about growing up on a shrimp boat. Just absolutely amazing stories that you just really can't write a book about
Yeah.
the experiences I've had that just come natural
Hmm.
just because of the opportunity that I had.
Yeah. That's a really neat way to grow up. And I've talked about this on the podcast before. I was raised on a little horse farm up in Northwest Georgia. And it was just neat running through the woods. And you don't realize it when you're in the moment. I'm sure you didn't when you were a kid either, how blessed you are to grow up that way, not
Uh,
growing up in the concrete jungle where you go to a playground, there's 40 people, kids, whatever. You can just go be by yourself or be with your friends and just get lost and have so much fun out there in the woods. But all that to say, my boys are growing up here. They're not growing up on shrimp boats, but they're growing up in coffee shop. We're on the boat all the time. We're at the beach. We're going up the river, and they're getting into crabbing and fishing. And I love it. I love sharing just a little bit that I know, sharing that with them. And I hope they pass that kind of stuff on to their kids and just keep that going. So you grew up here in the '80s, and you were playing sports. What kind of sports you play? Football,
Little
baseball.
school, everything.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Played baseball. Loved baseball. Was built for football.
Was it
Um,
Carabel High School or
I played in Carabel.
okay?
Basically, we grew up Brown Elementary. Great little school, K through 6. Great small community. Great teachers. And then when you got in the 6th grade, sort of halfway through the year, the decision was whether you go to Appalachia or you go to Carabel,
Mm.
arch enemies, in a sense.
Oh yeah.
And I chose Carabel. At the time, had some great friends that in Appalachia grew up. I chose Carabel and coming along at a time, sort of transitioning from the Green Devils to the Panthers. That sort of new rivalry. Played football at the time. We was the smallest school in the state of Florida that had a football team.
That's awesome.
My senior year, it was pretty amazing. I remember I played in, of course, come tell you how good we was. And I ain't like most people. I tell everybody, I said we really wasn't that good, and most of it was my fault. And, most people, it was always somebody else's fault. But really, looking back, I was probably one of the better players on the team, maybe the best. I don't know. But I only done as much as it took to beat the guy next to me.
Right.
I never lived up to my potential. I never competed to be the best I could be.
Right.
And that sort of goes a long way. I think that's a lesson for kids today too.
Yeah.
Situation, you can get out and you can blame a lot of people, but really in real life, it's what you do and what you make of it. And the surroundings may not be the best, but if you really compete against yourself to be the best person you can, you'll succeed. And I sort of learned that through that, especially going into college and all. Like I say, played baseball, come along, done pretty good. Um, Decent player, sort of got out of school, maybe could have played in some college at some point, but it was sort of like, realistically, I'm not going to make it to the big leagues. And sort of went in to get a teaching degree.
Where'd you go to college at?
Went to Chipola
Okay.
for a year, then I wound up come back and was going to finish my 2 years at Gulf Coast and wound up having a wreck in '95, which sort of put that out. Um, at the same time we'd started the store and then it was starting to take off. So I come out direct with several $1,000s worth of bills,
Mm-hmm.
and it was sort of just time to go to work.
Yep.
Look back on it. I always since said I'd finish up getting a degree and may do that someday. Who knows? But at the same time, it's led me to a life that you really can't compete with. I've spent 30 years for the most part working every day with my mother and my father. And, that's an experience
Special.
that everybody can't get. And I working along beside my mama is just absolutely great. We always work good together. It seemed like she'd be here, and we just sort of moved together. We
Yeah.
never had to tell each other. Me and Daddy's always done good. I sort of tell people he's the young kid in the group, and I'm the old man. He has got the faith that he can do anything and conquer anything, and we can do anything and buy anything. And I'm a lot more reserved and conservative. Together, we make really good decisions.
balance.
And I tell him that he's always talking about the things he's going to do, and I'm always talking about the things I've done, which is sort of reversed. But I mean, that's sort of where it was, and but like I say, I can't tell you that it was not the best choice. Circumstances put me there, but I mean, tremendous way of life, tremendous life. I'm getting close to 50. I still sometimes think of myself as a kid.
Yeah.
But, then you sat back and it's like, no, you're the men.
Right.
The people my age group are the men of the community that's going out and doing things. And we really need to take that responsibility, not lightly, but we need to be shaping these young kids, because that's sort of one of the things that also was one of the best things of growing up in the time I did is I was able to actually interact probably with the first generation of children that grew up in Eastpoint. And I got to see the men come through and going fishing every day. And we've lost several of them recently, but they've helped shape my theory and my philosophy of how to be a businessman and what it takes to build a good community.
I think Hagen Moore is the epitome of that. Between jiu-jitsu and he's a fisherman. He is obsessed. I'm obsessed. I think he might be more obsessed than I am, and that's so good. That's so good for these young kids, especially these young boys, to get out there and learn to fish.
Matt, that's sort of the going back to growing up as a kid. That basically was the life of living in Eastpoint, is his lifestyle. It was a safe place. It was a community. I've talked to a couple of friends about, just to ask them, sort of pick their mind of what they remember about growing up. And there's 2 or 3 things that really repetitively comes up. One is the community. It was a safe place. You could get on a bicycle and you could ride to the ferry landing, or you could ride down here in the channel, and every parent knew who you was and would watch out for you and take care of you. But, as a kid, we'd go down here, we'd jump off shrimp boats in the channel, swim in the channel. Sharks didn't bite back then.
They do now.
I mean, we had no idea they were sharks or gators. That was play toys. We played with them. We'd go down there, hang a chicken off a shrimp boat and swim with them. Now that kind of stuff scares me slap to death to think that I'd do that with my kid. But, at that time it was just an age of innocence, and it was just sort of the thing you done. I think one of the best experiences, I think riding down the road, I'm riding down Avenue A one day, and my wife and her mother and father is coming to pick me up as we going out of town for a minute. And I called her on the phone and I said, "Hey, get your camera ready. I want you to take a picture of something." I said, she said, "What is it?" I said, "You'll know when you see it." I said, "It's the epitome. It is the symbol of what it means to grow up in Eastpoint." And she come along, and sure enough, she figured out what it was. But there's a guy, and I got a picture of it on my wall. Over, y'all can stop by and I'll share it with you. It's one of the local kids here. But he's sitting there, and he's got his tackle spread out behind him, and he's got his pole, and he's fishing in a ditch. And the chances of catching a fish in that ditch is absolutely none. And I'm like, man, I wish I was rich and had some way of doing it. I'd go release 20 trout behind him, let them swim through that culvert. But that's what it was like to grow up in Eastpoint. It was a safe place you could go, and every day that's what we done. We either playing on the street, playing football with each other. We're riding bicycles around. We're playing in ditches. We're swimming in the channel. We're doing all them things of innocence, and that's that lifestyle. It wasn't 1 or 2 kids then; it was all kids. It's what we all done daily. Is we spent our time fishing and swimming and goofing off. I remember I come along time when there was no oystering in the summer, would actually go up into Tate's Hill to different creeks and all. Literally, it was like half the town would actually move to Wrights Lake when they couldn't oyster, and you'd go up there and everybody'd have a tent or a camper or staying in the back of a truck. And basically, the whole community would go to Wrights Lake and would live there for a month or two, and we'd play in them woods and swim to the middle of the lake or do whatever we could. It was really amazing, and really a testament to the resilience of one, the simple life that people lived,
Mhm.
but two, you know, they just made time for family, they made time for recreation, and they went out, which is something I think that we really losing in today's day and time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. I think it is one or two kids out of 10 that want to be outside. They want to get off that screen for a little bit and go get their feet dirty, their hands dirty, go explore the woods, get on the water. It's sad because they're missing out on so much life.
Yeah.
And these screens are becoming more and more addicting, and unfortunately they are integral to our life, as as a small business owner, we got to be on there ordering stuff, answering emails, but it is sad, you go to the beach and you see a family at the beach and that kid is he's not out there waiting. He's on his iPad on
Yeah.
the beach. I'm like, man, it's sad to see. But I want to circle back to something you said a minute ago. We were talking about basically being a better version of yourself than you were yesterday rather than competing with your peers. I think that's so important. And that's a life lesson. And it sounds like you learned that kind of the hard way. But that's something that the kids in my gym, I'm trying to instill in them, because they go to a competition, or if they're brand new, they're gauging themselves against their peers. And I'm like, guys, it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
But you got to look at yourself last week, yesterday, last month. Have you made improvements? That's what's important. And if you can shape that mindset as a young person and then as an adult, you can do a lot of great things.
I mean, and that truly is it, I mean, because you can find an excuse.
Yep.
You can always find an excuse, but the things you've done, you've come in, I really admire you in coming in. I actually told my wife the other day, I'm like, man, when's he find the time? He's got a business, he's doing this. Now we're doing podcasts, and it's great. I
Appreciate
mean,
it.
you're young, you're coming on the scene, you're really you're making an impact in the community. And it's not about you, it's about a simpler life and giving something back to the community for
Yeah.
kids. So that's a lesson to one. One is you are absolutely correct. You know, listen, life's hard. I've had some knocks.
Yep.
It's not about getting knocked down, because you're going to get knocked down as a kid. And it's not about the guy around you, because there's always going to be a guy that's got more than you.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to always be a guy that seems like he's got everything, even though he ain't trying. But life really is what you make in it.
Yes, sir.
And you need to compete with yourself and enjoy what you're doing. And at the end of life, listen, we try to support the community. We probably could have some more. I could probably be greedy and have more things. But at the end of the day and at the end of life, was that a fulfilled life?
Right.
Or is fulfillment of life actually being the best version you can be, but at the same time pulling other people up around you at the same time? And kids need to realize that. Yes, you need to be competitive, and there needs to be a trophy for winning and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's not about the trophy. It's about the experience that you got and the better person you become. And I think that's where I said earlier, it's guys like me and you that need to be instilling that in kids. That look, there's more to it than just a trophy. There's more to it than that. And at the end of the day, maybe the Lord will bless you to do whatever you want to do, whether it's play a sport or sing a song or whatever. But at the end of the day, you need to be happy with the person that you are and the progress you've made and the things you've accomplished in life.
I couldn't agree with that more. Getting back to those simple things, family, relationships, living life. That's why we're here, man. We were doing the Atlanta rat race, and I grew up on a farm. Like, I'm not used to that, but I thought that's where you had to go to be successful. You go get a degree, you'll get a desk job. And after so long, it's soul sucking. You're 3 hours in your vehicle in traffic, sitting at a desk in a job you hate. And this is something I don't really talk about a whole lot. I brought it up once or twice in the podcast, but we lost our firstborn baby. He's born 24 weeks and he lived for about a day. And when you go through something like that, it shakes you to your core and you got to refocus, because not only are you living that rat race, but you're also, even if you don't mean to, in a way, kind of keeping up with the Joneses because you're in these neighborhoods and everybody, so Bob down the streets, get that new car, whatever it is. Even though we're not those kind of people by nature, you just kind of get caught up in that. And we were looking for a new life. So we picked up and moved down here, and man, we haven't looked back. I can't wait to raise my kids here. I love it here. I'll die here.
And that, I think that's sort of a testament, especially to Eastpoint right here, is I mean, there's those that are successful. There's those that are successful that other people may not think they're successful, but they've lived a decent life. And for the most part, I tell people, I said, most of the people in Eastpoint just they just want to live and be left alone. I mean, you can ride by some people's house and some people may shine down on it and say, well, or that neighborhood or whatever. But most part, them people are fulfilled, and they may not have much, but if you need something and they got two of them, they'll give you one of them.
100%.
More than likely, if they got one of them, they'll give you one of them. But I mean, that's the type of people, and I think that's probably the best thing about this area and growing up here. Like I said earlier, I mentioned some of the old guys that I really was very fortunate to be shaped by. And I was blessed enough that God gave me enough sense to listen to them, and I'd ask them questions and I'd listen to their stories. And I've got tons of them that I can just tell you that I've heard from old guys that's just come around just bait store talk. And it's really a shame. Sort of are so busy now that sometimes we don't have the time to have that bait store talk. We've sort of lost some of that crowd. Part of it's we're busy. The other parts, people are busy with the shutting down the oyster bar and different things. A lot of people now are 40-hour-week jobs and they got to show up and they don't have time. Where when you was oystering or fishing, you sort of was on your own time. You had to work and you showed up, and at the end of the day, you'd done your day's work. But you could adjust that a little bit. You could go a little later or a little earlier, So I mean, that's to me, that's why I love this community. And I've sat around and I've looked and I've sort of joked with that I'll never plan on leaving this place. I said, if I ever leave, it's going to be because God told me. And I said, I hope that don't happen because he's got sort of a sense of humor. I'll probably wind up in third world country or something, I mean, so, but yeah, I mean, this is home. This is, it's great, and we have some great people. It's really good to see somebody like you come in. Your family embraces that. You're not wanting to change that. You're wanting to enhance that and build that and feed on it and help the young generation coming out. I really admire you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot. But we love it here because we have been embraced by the community, and we moved here because of the way it is, not the way somebody wants it to be. We love it the way it is. And if we can do things like a coffee shop to just enhance it a little bit, that's fantastic. If I can pay my bills doing that, that's great. So moving forward, we get the bait and tackle shop open in 1993.
Yep.
And you guys have everything from inshore, offshore, freshwater. You got anything you need for the beach. You've got hats and sunscreen, anything else you need, sunglasses. You guys now have the scoop, and we'll circle back to that in a minute. But what was it like growing up in that bait shop? And real quick, Brandon and I were talking about this the other day, talking about shop talk. Right now is our busy season, right? Which is good for business. But at the same time, you're right, you miss out on those conversations a little bit. It's one thing during the fall or the winter when it slows down a little bit, really get to know a family, and then you build relationships and they kind of become family. Whereas the summer, it's so busy, it's hard to have those conversations. So it is kind of a double-edged sword. I just wanted to mention that real quick. But what was it like growing up at that?
Well, it's sort of funny. I remember 2 times basically in my life. I was thinking about it earlier. I got a lot of stories and all, but that teenage years from 13 to 18 or so is really sort of a blur. I was so busy with school and so busy with ball. When I sat back and I think about growing up in Eastpoint, one is I got that before teen years when we were swimming in the channel. and we was fishing, and we was on an oyster boat or on a shrimp boat. And then the next part of life that I remember is my 18, 19, 21, 23-year-old life of in the bait store. We basically started it the year I graduated. Like I say, I went to college for a little while, wound up running the bait store with my mom and dad and going in. And now we got a little bit of everything, but it didn't start out that way. Tell you how where the origination of the bait store come from is my father Shrimp. I told you, he'd go out and he'd dock at the Sportsman's Lodge, and a lot of times he would leave a cooler of shrimp, and the fishermen would come by and they'd get a pound or 2 pounds out, and they'd leave the money up on the dash of the boat. So he had done that for a couple of years, and he done that. And in the early '90s, when everybody was banning nets and they was banning everything, he went down south to a couple of meetings to fight for the seafood workers of Franklin County and all. And they got down there, and this organization would stand up and they'd say, "We 36,000." Next organization, when I'm from this magazine, and we are 96,000 strong. And everybody had joined together in Franklin County, and we'd stood up, and we 1,200 strong. And he sort of come back and he told my mother, he said, "Look," he said, "the way of life that we're doing it, of being able to shrimp when we want to, how we want to, and make a good, honest living is going away. We need a backup plan." And it was funny. He'd circled that block countless times, and he'd pray about it. And he's like, "Okay, God, give me that. And, if it's your will, let it." And we wound up, it was an old service station. It was built in probably the late 50s. The other one, the ice cream shop, actually, a neat notice that it actually was the first post office that wasn't in a house base.
Okay.
And Mr. George Creamer was postmaster. Hopefully one day I'm gonna build a little tribute to him.
That'd be cool.
I've got the actual doors that come out of the old post office. I think I can get the safe. At that time when he was come along, it was actually signed by the president, which
Wow.
was Kennedy. So a lot of that stuff he was shot at in that post office, jumped through the side door, all kind of history in that part. The other building was a few years later. When we bought it, it was under a Storage Tank Removal Act, so the front was messed up. They had wells all over the place checking for benzene and different stuff. And then we had 2 bays that didn't have a roof, and we started it in that front little section. And my dad would shrimp. He'd come in with a cooler of his shrimp, put it in there. I remember at that time he basically started with a cooler of shrimp and $800.
Wow.
He spent $400 on a pair of Hobart scales, $400 on tackle, and about 300 of it was hooks. And my mama looked at him and said, "Charles, you are crazy. There's no way anybody needs that many hooks." And we had a guy that worked with us, and every week he just sort of shaped it to what people needed. So, we started with $400 worth of tackle, cooler shrimp, and a set of scales. He worked for about the first year, and my mom begged him to give it away, burn it, sell it, do whatever. Because she was shucking, having put her money in to bail it out. He was out working. He said, "If we're going to starve to death, I might as well get in here and work and starve to death doing it." He got in there, and the community really supported him, come around, great group of people. Best part of this area that I said is that people really embraced him. They really come in, and he shaped it, listened to people, and brought in what they wanted. And we just slowly expanded. We went from there and added the bait room on in the back. Started carrying some live bait and some different stuff. And then he added on about 10 foot more of a building and put a lean-to roof on it. Then we went in and opened up half that bay and filled in. Then we wound up expanding to the whole part. Then we added a little lean-to on the back, and then we added the 40-foot on. Then we added storage, and then we had the ice cream part. And, from there, it basically was renting it, not really making any money off of it. I'm like, "Daddy, we can use it for storage more than anything." So it went from storage, and then me and my wife had sort of had the idea of doing Bible bookstore and an ice cream shop a few years back. And when I was talking to him one day, and he said, "Well, we can join that." And we decided to try the ice cream out and do it. It's really neat. The ice cream has started basically the way that the tackle started is a lot of our customers are the local people, some of the older people that come through, and they just are taking that time to spend together. Um, but back to what it was like, that's sort of the origination of where we come from and the struggle. We still, I don't know that we got anything, but we got a decent store. And we try to make sure that people want to spend money with us.
Mm-hmm.
Any people talk about different stuff and competition, and I'm like, look, we offer people a fair product at a fair price, and we make them want to come back. We're going to succeed. So, our competition is us doing what we should do. And it's a struggle when you start hiring out and getting people, it's a struggle to get them to see the concept that you have of actually, it's about treating people right.
Yep.
And if you treat people right, they'll rally around you and you'll support business. And, that's the thing about during that time frame that really probably shaped my life more than anything. I can think of maybe one guy outside of the community that was a businessman that wasn't necessarily a first or second generation person coming up that shaped me. And that person actually is Tom Tiffin, who in his own rights lived here a long time. So I mean, he's really been here a while. But all the other ones was James Polis and C.L. Odom, Dewey, Mr. Buddy Braxton, Vernon Gilbert, these old guys that would come in and talk. Actually, Wayne Hicks that owned his, he owned this oyster house at one time. He'd come in and sit where we got our oil right now. And every morning you could pop in, Wayne would be sitting there. But, listen to these guys tell these stories and, learning back. I remember Mr. James at an early age, he'd come in the store, or actually even before when I was in a shucking stall, he'd come and bring an old hoop off of a barrel and a wire ring. And he's like, "Rex, this is the toys we played with when we was a kid." And he'd have me out there chasing the ring around on the shelves in front of an oyster house, or either bring the thimble in where you take a rubber band and just make your own tractor to dig ruts. So he come in, he brought that to me, and he'd tell me stories, and they'd get in the bait store and tell stories on each other about when they hunt and so and so. We was going on a dog chase, and we all got around there, and so wasn't here. So we come back around, and that something happened. They drove in the ditch, or either shot their own wheels out, or something. With crazy, or maybe even they tied their axle to a tree where they couldn't get around there, or whatever it was. But these stories, and then and the men of this community that come along. I remember Mr. George Creamer telling me about, basically there's 3 or 4 kids. He had grew up down about where they are now, where Creamers are, on Seagree land, different stuff. And there's 2 or 3 of them. And it was really neat back then. You had the ferry and all going, and it was a gravel road. He said they'd go out and lay in front of the store and put their ear on the ground, because you could hear if the truck got off when he hit that gravel, you could hear it 3 or 4 miles down. And they may see 2 or 3 cars in a day.
Wow.
So they'd lay out there and listen. And when they heard a car coming, all of them would come out and stand and watch this car go by. And just hearing them stories about how Eastpoint was formed, and like Burt Millender, who come over here, and they basically, back then they didn't have motors on their boats, so they seined or sculled their boats, and they'd sculled their nets out across the sound, which is where it come from. And they wound up in Eastpoint because it was closer to the grounds they fished, or closer to the oyster house. Like my mom's parents, who come because they could work. It was closer to their work here, shucking and all, and different stuff. But hearing them stories of these old timers, then first generation of Eastpoint children, their families had moved here, and hearing all these stories and how they had accumulated stuff, that they had bought their first piece of land by shoveling shells, like Mr. Carl Lard did, and hearing this work ethic of, okay, you may not realize you're doing anything now, but if you keep accumulating and you work hard and you do these things, you'll make it a successful business. In the first few years, you're probably not going to see any harvest from it.
Right.
But if you keep doing it, in that simple life, and we'd cater to people and they'd ask for this and we'd get a couple of them and try it. And just them stories, them genuine stories of how they grew up here and how they'd moved in and the work ethic and how they fished for a living and made their life, and it was about, that, it was about family. It was about a good, honest day's work, church on Sunday. You had God in it, you had work in it, you had family in it. And that's what it was. They had time on their own. They was goofing off hunting and doing, but they made sure their families was took care of 1st. And then they took care of the things that they had. And if you look around, most of the guys that's got stuff and the families that's here, it's because they done that. They valued family, they valued God, they worked hard, and they accumulated. It wasn't that they come in with bunches of money and bunches of things. It's they worked hard and put that genuine work back into it. And that's sort of what Eastpoint was founded on, was that. And, we try to do that as a family in the bait store. Is, when we started out, we was probably 95% local. We catered to oystermen. I remember in the heyday that we'd see 200 plus people before 9 o'clock in the morning, which numbers is absolutely insane. We'd see
more
people.
My mind around and seeing that here, that sort of time frame.
Yeah. We literally then would see more people probably before 9 o'clock than we do now all day. And we didn't make a lot of profit on the items, but they was there every morning, and you'd get there at that time. We opened at 5 o'clock. You'd get there at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's 8 people waiting on you so they could get in line, and they'd come in, buy a pair of gloves and a drink and a cracker. And, we probably, looking back, we probably made less than 50 cents on that purchase, but it was 50 cents every day. And then they'd go work. They'd work 1 or 2 o'clock. Then they'd come back and then they'd buy a couple of worms or something to go hunting, a box of shells or something. So, we had them in the morning and then we'd get them in the evening. And that's sort of how we built it. We was really blessed to get in there. We just started getting the things that people needed in there. And like I say, in oystering sort of started slowing down. A lot of the other industries really went before oystering, with the ban on nets and mullet fishing, and that really impacted shrimp boats. There's been a decline of oyster boats, but there's also been a decline of shrimp boats and fishermen. And it's amazing. I don't know. I can't really tell you. It blows my mind. You'd think that a net ban would increase fish. It sounds logical. What I can tell you is that's not the case here. For some reason, when they worked the bay and they brought in a harvest, it done better. But, we catered to that. And then we've also, the other thing about the store we've been able to do is we've been able to mold ourselves to what the community needs. From there, we went from basically cups of worms, and then we come back in and we've added dog food because people needed a place to get dog food, hunting shells. We've done a little bit of archery, which filled a time that there basically was nothing going on during that time. We've sort of just built ourselves around the community, and the community supported us. The reason we're 33, 34 years old is because the community has embraced us.
Right.
I'm nowhere near foolish enough to think that, without the community supporting us, that we would be where we are. And we try our best to pay that back to the community. But that's, it was long days. We're there basically about 95 hours a week. We're trying to do that with 2 shifts. For a long time, it was me, mom and daddy, and maybe an after school helper. And we've just outgrew that. And now we've had to go reach out. But, there was times that it was a struggle with me and daddy. It's like, he's like, look, I got to have help at 5 o'clock. As a teenager, it's like, man, I need to sleep at 5 o'clock. But he was right. There was people there waiting on him, and they
Yeah.
depended on us as much as we depended on them to be there. But that to me is the greatest thing about working there and being there is one is being able to do it with my family.
My mom, I was very fortunate in that one of my best friends, Josh, helped me for a couple of years. This past summer, we had three great folks help us during the busy season. They moved down here from Kentucky just for the summer, Naomi and Anna and Cheney. But the constant since we've been going, at least after we opened 2 years, after about 2 years being open, was my mom. So she's kind of taken over the shipping and the wholesale side on the back end. And working with her has been awesome, man, because I don't consider my employee, right? We work together and we have that cadence. We kind of figure out, I'm over here, she needs to be over there, and we communicate without even talking sometimes, but we get to spend so much time together.
Yeah.
I've talked about this in the past, like moving down here with stuff because I was leaving my family and friends, but my parents moved here, my in-laws moved here. And what's really funny is when my dad pops in and helps a little bit, she's the one that's got to tighten him up because he'll forget something. So it's funny watching her get on to him. I think she likes it more than she'd like to admit. But what's it been like working with your parents for so long?
Like I say, we agree. Probably the best thing has been working with my mom, day in, day out. And you're correct. It's like she knows what you're thinking. She's where you need her to be. You don't have to tell her. Me and my dad sometimes clash, but I've had to come to an understanding of really realizing where he's coming from. And there's times that we could have had a rough relationship because we did clash sometimes working together, especially long days. You 7 days a week,
Get tired.
you're with him. But I finally realized that hey, every decision he makes is because he thinks it's the best decision for the family,
Right.
and it's coming out of love. So when you understand that and you realize that, that's really where we need to be. One as men, but as men of the community too, is we need to be doing it for our family and what's best, what's right. And since then, with us realizing that, we make really good decisions together. Like I say, the best part and the worst part sometimes is working with them because if I'm if I get time away from the shop, they have to be there. So our time together is at the shop, and we don't get to have a lot of time away from the shop. I think the trade off of being there every day with them definitely outweighs having them moments of away,
Right.
for a moment. We build a lifetime together of
Yeah.
working together.
I understand, man. You guys are building something really awesome over there at Fisherman's Choice. Like I've talked about before. We go over there. I go do a little shopping with the bait section, and then me and my wife and my kids we walk over to the scoop. We get the biggest portions at the most affordable prices, and then we'll pack up in the car before we go fish, whether we're doing surf fishing or taking a little boat out or whatever. We go park at the Eastpoint Channel. We just eat our ice cream, and we're just making memories. But you guys are a big part of it. I don't know if you realize that, but
Yeah.
you guys are a big part of our weekends, and I love it. So fast forwarding a little bit to Eastpoint today, you're heavily involved in the community. I've been here your whole life. What are some changes you may want to see or may not want to see, especially as being a leader in the community? What are your thoughts on Eastpoint today and tomorrow?
I think the biggest thing, I'm not going to tell you it'd be the perfect Eastpoint because I think I grew up in the perfect Eastpoint.
Right.
But if I could assemble something close to that, it would be I think our most important asset is to protect in the waterfront in between the store here and Barber Seafood. That's the focal point. Everybody riding through, they see that. So, I really would like to see the lowest impact of use on the south side of 98 as we can get. There's been ideas of floating, changing that zoning from seafood only, and that sort of scares me because anything you try to do with the property, with the setbacks, you're probably going to have to skirt the law.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's probably the thing I hate to see change the most would be the view from riding down 98 and
Right.
seeing the bay. The things I think that we're probably going to have to work on and cave a little bit is we're probably going to have to give up a little bit on density. We may have to wind up letting a little bit bigger of a place develop. But I think what's important is that we allow that in the right areas,
Right.
not on the waterfront. I'd love to see that. I love the idea of like maybe a food court with an open air market. Seems to be the trend a lot of places, and I think that's a very low impact on
Yeah,
land.
yeah,
And I'd love to see a boardwalk
that'd be beautiful.
basically that spans the whole walkway of East Point Channel. And with that, it would have to be a cooperation between maybe some state and government funds buying some land, some private ownership, allowing use of land and different things for that to work. But I envision a working waterfront to where an individual can launch his boat and pick his family up on that waterfront. An oysterman can offload his oysters on that boardwalk. A guide fisherman can launch his boat and pick his
Hmm.
party up. And with that, some low impact, maybe some parking, which would alleviate future problems of parking through East Point. Parking is not necessarily the best thing that you want to see. But in the situation, it's only for a moment.
Right.
They'll use that space. It'll alleviate problems of other areas. But at the end of the day, you still can ride through there, and there's nothing that obstructs that waterway and that beautiful scenery that you ride through. And then, like I say, smart development on the north side of 98. And I think we're really careful we can have that. But what scares me is that we're at a point in time that if we have the wrong development that comes through and we lose the right tourism that comes through. Right now, I think we have the greatest tourists to come. We wouldn't be here without our local community support. We lose the tourist base that we got, which I think is the best tourists. They come here because of what we are, and they want to see us stay that. If we lose that and we change that, we are on a pivotal point that East Point could go downhill, in my opinion. The worst thing I can imagine is a row of townhouses up and down 98. And if that's the design you like, that's good for you. But that's not what I envision when I see East Point. I see a low impact, laid back fishing village. It's probably not going to be the village that we had in the past, but I think we still could have that if we embrace that. Which brings me to the point of what I think is really important. I'm really big on community. And my life has been shaped around God and churches. I hear stories when I ask different people what it meant. It was a church on Sunday or it was a Bible school or something. But then it was community and then it was family. And I think that's what we got to focus on is that we may have to cave a little bit on what we want, but we got to come together. There's something that's been said that I understand the sentiment and where people come from, but I don't necessarily agree with the statement. And that is that you can't get the local people to agree on something. And there's been times in the past that we've fought for our ideals and our opinions. I think that's wrong because if you let something happen to an individual in this community, everybody will lay down their swords and their shovels and they'll go to the aid of that person.
Yes, sir.
So, I think if we have the right vision and we really protect what's really important to us, that's what's important. And I think we need that low impact. I'm for some development, smart development on the mainland, whether it's a documentum or whatever. I think we got to be real careful about mooring boats overnight. So I think it's our best East Point is a working waterfront that uses the space for a moment. That's whether it's an individual or a guide fisherman or an oysterman or a tourist. It's all an East Point where we can live together like we have in the past. I know it don't sound like them two mixed together, but we've seemed to do a pretty good job of marrying the two in this community.
I was going to say, it sounds like you've got a pragmatic vision, which I appreciate. And I would like to see that played out. So, Mr. Rex, the unofficial mayor of East Point, I think now folks can see why. You grew up here, you want to protect it here, but you're also smart in the sense that we do need to grow a little bit, but we want to grow the right way.
Yep.
So, man, I appreciate your time. This was so much fun.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for the
Appreciate it.
stories.